Signs, wonders. Everyone looks for signs. Some are very important. Little octagonal red with the 4-letter stop, that's an important one. Don't blow through a stop sign, you're in trouble. Yield, slow down, one way. All of these are usual, regular signs. So much so that we ignore them. We don't intently look for these things. We know, every day, same old routine. Get out of the driveway, come down the street, and there's going to be a stop sign, I know it. But are we paying attention? That's the thing. We know the signs are there. In the life of faith, you and I, we are the sign of God's presence. Everybody wants to see something else, something wonderful, something spectacular, like huge fireworks displays or something like that. A little shock and awe. The God sign is very unique because it comes from the divine heart, of which we who are baptized into Christ have a portion of, because we are the sons and daughters of God, but not without the responsibility of being God's sons and daughters. The Genesis story, Cain and Abel. You have the power to overcome sin. In other words, it's not by default, it's by choice. Oh. So there's no loophole there, is there? Oops. No, there's not a loophole. You know what is required. You know what is necessary. Don't try to keep finding ways to get out of the Christian responsibility of living as a child of God. And yet our human hearts constantly do that. Constantly. We've trained ourselves to do that, subconsciously. But God looks at the heart. Because we have that unique choice, that unique ability, we are called to that unique responsibility of being Christians, of being in the world a sign of God's presence, a sign of mercy, compassion, reconciliation, healing, respecting life. So many things. And yet we pick and choose. Christianity is not celebrated in a cafeteria where you walk along and say on your tray, I want that on my tray and that on my tray. That looks a little bit too tough. Skip. Christianity is celebrated, yes, in a unique building, but when we can't be in the building, it is still celebrated in the building of the church, the human building blocks of the church, you and I. It is still celebrated in the life that we live. And so we realize we don't choose to go into cafeteria-style Christianity. And because we are forced out of a building does not mean we are not church. I remember my father talking about being in World War II. And he said, on a Sunday morning, because we talked about church and buildings, etc., he said, on a Sunday morning, with the chaplain celebrating the Mass on the hood of a Jeep in a war zone, we were still united as God's people. That is a profound statement, because it is recognition within ourselves that we are the living sign, the living presence of God, called to be His voice for the voiceless, called to be His arms that reach out in love and compassion, called to be the ear that listens with compassion, called to be the eye that sees the good in people first and not the bad. The heart of God that tries to pull the good out of everyone else by living as best we can. Yes, we're limited as human beings, but we're unlimited with the grace of God. That grace has the power to change our hearts first and then change the hearts of the world. And so we must continue to speak. We must continue to see. We must continue to listen. We must continue to reach out. We must continue to be the sign of God's presence in every age and among every generation. It's a great challenge, especially these days. But it is a challenge that leads us to the fullness of life versus minimal life, or losing the life that we see or want to experience. Are we up to the challenge? That's the question. Can we see within ourselves a reflection of God's divine love and presence enough to desire to be that presence of God all the time, 24/7? That is a great challenge. And we're not going to meet it 24/7. That's the sad part, because of our human nature. But when we stop trying, we'll never achieve that. We must always struggle with our faith. We must always struggle to make our faith present, make God present in this world. The only time we can stop is that moment when we step from this life into eternity. And hopefully, with God's grace and blessing, with our desire to be His grace and His blessing to the world each day, hopefully step into His kingdom one day. My sisters and brothers, let us pray for one another. Let us pray that we have that strength and resolve to be the sign of God, so that others might see clearly God's presence in the world each day.